Welcome to the Gazette's Pints Politics. I don't know about you guys, but I had really been looking forward to drinking a glass of wine and seeing you all in person at Cedar Ridge Winery tonight, but it was not to be. The new surge in COVID cases in Iowa made us decide to move the event back to our virtual setting, which is still pretty great. So thank you for being here to our audience. Tonight, we've got regulars, Gazette columnist Adam Sullivan and Gazette political reporter James Lynch. And our special guest tonight is Sofia DeMartino, a Gazette editorial fellow and community relations and grants director at Horizons, a family service alliance based in Cedar Rapids. Welcome, Sofia.
Thank you.
And we're missing Todd Dorman tonight, but we'll have him back next time. So we'll get started here in a minute, but I wanted to invite our audience to submit questions. I think there's a way that you can do that through the Zoom link that then pops in to me and I can look at that. Or if you want, you can just email me and I'll try to be checking Outlook here. It's just Erin F. I'm sorry, that's my personal Gmail. It's erin.jordan@thegazette.com. I mean, you could email me Gmail, be fine. All right, so as of today, there's less than a week before the U.S. planned withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, and things are not going well. As the United States works to evacuate thousands of people, including American service members and Afghans who helped Americans over the past 20 years in Afghanistan, today there were two explosions at the airport in Kabul. And, you know, I think support for pulling troops out of Afghanistan went from 69% in April to, I think, 49% in a poll earlier this month by Morning Consult and Politico. But leaving that aside for a minute, most people agree America seems to be botching this evacuation. I wanted to ask, just throw it out to the group at large, what should we be doing differently or better?
It seems like this wasn't very well planned, and you would think that it's not like this evacuation just happened. President Trump negotiated with the Taliban, said we were going to be out by May. President Biden set a deadline of August 31st. So it seems like there should have been plenty of time to put together a plan. I think there's a lot of questions that have been raised. Let me say, I think it would have been chaotic whoever was president and whenever this happened. I think that's a given in a situation like this. I think what is sort of hard to understand is why there hasn't been a plan or a plan that's been executed better than this. It seems like troops were withdrawn perhaps too soon. Maybe they should have been left there until the evacuation was over. Now we're in this situation where we're giving the Taliban a list of names of Americans who we want to help evacuate, and I guess asking the Taliban to go find these people. Confusion seems to be sort of the overriding description, chaotic, confusing, which is not good. And nobody really seems to know how many Americans are left in Afghanistan who want to leave, and how many people who worked with the United States over the past 20 years are still trying to get out.
Beyond even just planning, I think that there is room for opportunity in terms of the way that things are being communicated, in terms of the way that our action steps are being communicated, what the future holds could be communicated better. And I mean, some of that is probably just because it's hard to predict at this point with the way that things have really taken a turn for the worst very quickly.
I think given what the situation was 2 weeks ago, I think that the U.S. forces have done an okay job with a really terrible situation. I think and it's second guessing at this point. I think that the problems were with what led up to that situation. And so the president's, when he spoke several days ago, he said, you know, some people didn't want to leave before then. Well, some people did. Some people have been, you know, begging to leave for 10 years or more. And, you know, they said it would cause a crisis of confidence if they pulled out people too soon, or, you know, too soon ahead of the withdrawal. But there was never any confidence in the in the Afghan government. To the extent that there was confidence, it was because that the United States had propped it up. And so I think the Biden administration deserves criticism for what led up to the withdrawal, and as does every president for the last 20 years for getting us into this situation. But I want to be really clear that Joe Biden deserves a lot of credit for doing something that was always going to have unpopular implications, but in the grand scheme of things is the right thing to do. That we can't be at war in Afghanistan forever, and there for many years it's been clear that there was no objective there. So like I said, well, he deserves the criticism he's getting, and the whole system does. It was important that we do leave.
I suppose that given that we've been there 20 years and haven't been able to win a war, that maybe this is a fitting end, a chaotic and sort of haphazard evacuation in the final hours of this, 2-decade boondoggle.
And Sofia, I know that your son is enlisted in the military and just began basic training, with, like you mentioned, communication. Would you like to see that improve, to the troops and to others who might be put into foreign countries? Oh, you're muted.
I caught it. I'm not new to being a mother, but I am new to being a military mother. And he left for basic training 3 weeks ago, right before all of this sort of came out in the press and became the front page headline every single day. Communication would be great. At this point, like I said, it's hard to know what the future holds, and I'm sure it's very hard to predict what the future holds. But I sort of wait with bated breath, along with a lot of other people who have loved ones who are in the military right now.
No, Joni Ernst and Governor Kim Reynolds and other Republicans have said that Iowa should take in Afghan refugees. I'm curious to know why panelists think the GOP is so much more open to this than to asylum seekers from Honduras or Guatemala, for example.
I think the idea of immigration from Mexico and from South America is just such a, those people are very stigmatized for many reasons over many decades. That's not necessarily true of the Afghan people. And I think that it's a humanitarian crisis that's on our TV screens, that's on our Twitter feeds every day in a way, and it's not as politically charged as that is. And there's also the political angle of by standing up to accept refugees from Afghanistan, it's puts the Biden administration in a poor light, for instance, or it adds to their case that he's botched this withdrawal. And so there certainly are political reasons for it, but when politicians are right, and I think we should make it easy for them to come to the right conclusion. And so I give Joni Ernst and Kim Reynolds and several other Iowa figures who have spoken in support of Afghan refugees, I give them credit for doing that.
I think Adam's right. There are some politics involved. The situations are different, however, in that the Afghans that are coming here as refugees, many of them were allies. They're being vetted to some degree before they get here. Asylum seekers aren't. It's a different situation. And not to minimize the politics involved in the statements that we've heard from some of our elected officials, but the situations aren't apples to apples.
I think it's unfortunate the way that Latinx immigrants have been scapegoated by the GOP in terms of scapegoated for perceived crime, scapegoated in terms of an influx of drugs to this country, the fact that we are dealing with that by sending Iowa state troopers to the border. I think that there are a lot of reasons politically that it's sort of a double-edged sword. We're willing to leverage the good press of bringing in people from a region where we were and where we wanted to do so much good that is sort of imploding right now. And unfortunately, in terms of the Latinx population, there's more political benefit to continuing to scapegoat that community rather than extending the helping hand that is needed.
It's ironic too, especially that we just got the Census Bureau numbers earlier this month, and Iowa grew slightly, but we have a labor shortage in Iowa. We need more people. If you look at states that are growing and thriving, economically, they have growing populations. Iowa has a very slow growing population and a very aging population. It seems like it should be politically and economically popular to welcome immigrants, especially immigrants who want to come here. And even, they're going through a lot of hardship to get to the United States and are looking for any opportunity to support themselves and families and build a new life. So to me, it's ironic that we're not welcoming them to the United States and to Iowa.
The conservative talking point for many years has been, I'm not against immigration, I'm just against illegal immigration. But then if you say to those same people, well, let's just make much more immigration legal, they don't like that either. So it's, to raise up what Sofia said, I mean, there is a lot of racism and, bias wrapped up in that. And it's unfortunate. And perhaps the situation in Afghanistan can be a situation that, opens people's eyes to the value of immigration and refugees. I think there's some signs that happened after Vietnam, that, there's these populations that came here and they were, they acclimated and they also kept their own cultures, but they became really strong contributing members to our communities. And hopefully that can happen again.
Question from an audience member, Debbie Koopman. She says, as I see the men trying to get on planes to leave Afghanistan, I worry about the women left behind. How do you see their lives after August 31st?
I think one of the more telling things that I've seen related to women's rights in Afghanistan and how that's going is the people who are fleeing because they have been working in that field, working to improve women's rights and working to improve equity and equality for women in Afghanistan. So I don't think that bodes well for the immediate future.
Yeah, there's some speculation that because women's roles in Afghanistan over the past 20 years have changed greatly, and they're able to go to school and hold jobs and public office and things like that, that it'll be hard for the Taliban to change that. I'm not sure I'm optimistic about that. When you look at, how the Taliban operates, basically it's through brute strength. So, and they've indicated that they'll respect women's rights within Sharia law. I don't think we should expect that to be a broad acceptance of the gains women have made in Afghanistan over the past 20 years.
Well, and I think too, just with that brute strength or brute force that you mentioned, if you've got children, for myself as a mom, I would do a lot to protect my kids, and I wouldn't want to give up rights for that, but it would be tough, a tough thing to deal with. Just changing gears a little bit, I know that we've had a lot of political visitors in the state, already this year. I think that former Democratic presidential candidate in Vermont, Senator Bernie Sanders, will be in Cedar Rapids Sunday. I think that's the right date for that. And Texas Senator and former GOP presidential candidate Ted Cruz was in Iowa last month, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican U.S. representative from Georgia, was at the Iowa State Fair earlier this month. So does that mean Iowa's caucuses are still first in the nation?
Probably the Republican ones. We don't know about the Democratic ones yet. Republicans haven't talked seriously in this cycle about changing the order. And the fact that Iowa Republican Chairman Jeff Kaufman now is on the calendar committee, chairing the calendar committee for the Republican National Party, probably bodes well for the first in the nation status of the Republican caucuses. Now, the Democratic caucuses, we don't know if they'll be first. I guess a bit of good news, perhaps for Iowans, is that Troy Price, who was the executive director of the Iowa Democratic Party, is taking on a similar role in New Hampshire. So there should continue to be a good alliance between Iowa and New Hampshire, which has the first in the nation primary. We'll have to wait and see. We might get a better idea later this year after DNC quarterly meetings, or when they, after they meet and talk about this. But there's still pressure on the DNC to change that order, go with a state like Nevada, where it's more representative of the demographics of the nation as a whole.
If there is an alliance with New Hampshire, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for Iowa, because really what holds back Iowa from, if we want to modernize our caucus process and allow people to participate remotely, or perhaps with a paper ballot rather than, being on the telephone or going to a physical event, New Hampshire is really what stops us from doing that. Anything that looks a little bit too much like a primary, so anything that uses a paper ballot, they're going to object to. And so I hear, I'm not a Democrat, but I talk to Democrats, and one thing I hear from some folks is that they could take or leave first in the nation. They prefer to have it, but their big thing is they don't want to do a caucus anymore. If we are going to do a caucus, they don't want it to be done like that, because the idea that you need to go to a high school gymnasium on one night for perhaps 2 or 3 hours to participate in the nomination process is just, it's totally whack. It's a system that was made to raise up and empower the party insiders at the expense of everyone else. Now it's become this mass event, and it doesn't make sense.
And it poses a lot of accessibility challenges for people living with disabilities, for people who are working jobs that don't allow them to, leave early for that purpose, that kind of thing. And cosign Democrat, take it or leave it.
So this week, Christina Bohannon, a first-term Democratic state representative, I believe, from Iowa City, announced she plans to challenge Marionette Miller Meeks for Iowa's 2nd congressional district. Adam, you live in the district, as do I. Were you surprised by this announcement? I mean, do you think an Iowa City law professor will have better chances in this district than, say, Rita Hart?
I don't know. Didn't surprise me, because I think there were a few people who kind of leaked that this might happen. I guess I would kind of clarify that, and everyone was reporting it as she was challenging Miller Meeks, but it's possible that they won't be in the same district. It looks like they will be, but it's possible they won't be, and we definitely don't know what the district will look like. But Dave Loebsack was a law professor, or excuse me, poli-sci professor who ended up living in Iowa City, and so I don't think that alone precludes you from winning the district. It'll more depend on what it looks like, but I was kind of interested in it because Representative Bohannon, she primaried an incumbent Democrat in 2020, and that's how she got the seat. So she's a first term, and one of her cases for winning that race in the primary was that that she wanted somebody in that seat who would kind of be more active statewide, or help the party raise money. Because if you're in a safe seat, you're supposed to contribute back to the state party, and she felt the former incumbent wasn't doing that. And so, and that's part of your case. It's a little bit weird to announce and run for higher office so soon after you were elected. But she seems like a good politician. I think she's has a lot of expertise that's useful right now because she does know the law so well. So it'll be an interesting race to watch.
I think Bohannon made a good first impression in the legislature. She, seems smart. She expresses herself well. She was involved in a lot of debate on the floor, which is usually a sign that people understand what they're talking. Sometimes is a sign they know what they're talking about, and she seemed to know what she was talking about. I think it's going to be an interesting race because this is a district that Dave Loebsack represented for 14 years, and then Marionette Miller Meeks comes along and squeaks out this victory. You would think that a Johnson County Democrat could find 7 votes to flip that district, but I think it's going to be a very different race for Bohannon in that when she ran for the legislature in that primary, she was sort of the progressive candidate versus the centrist or moderate candidate. That may not be as popular in Wapello County or Davis County as it is in Johnson County. And this is a district that Donald Trump carried twice by about 4 percentage points each time. So it could be a very competitive race.
It's also not impossible that Johnson and Lynn would end up in the same district. And so you could have, or excuse me, Atumwa and Lynn could end up in the same district. And so Miller Meeks and Hinson could, it's hard to see either of them leaving and running in another district, but that's possible.
So since you guys mentioned the redistricting, what's the timeline like and how soon might we know what these districts look like?
What I'm hearing is it'll probably be October, and you know, they're talking about they'll have maps by September 16th. The advisory commission has scheduled 3 public hearings the following week, 3 virtual hearings, and then they'll make a report, make a recommendation, and we'll get a map, and then the legislature will meet. So I'm hearing that it'll probably be mid-October before we, at least mid-October before we have a decision. It could take longer if the first map is rejected and the Legislative Services Agency has to go back and draw a second map. They're pretty good at drawing maps, so it doesn't take them a lot of time, but you know, every step takes more time. I think the big question mark here is, what is the Supreme Court going to do? Because it's clear that the legislature won't be able to meet the constitutional requirement to approve a plan by September 1st and that it be enacted or signed by the governor by September 15th. The Supreme Court has issued a very vague statement, sort of saying we're going to make sure it all runs well. But we don't know what they will do, if they will follow the Constitution or they'll let the legislative process play out, even though it doesn't meet the constitutional deadline.
So kind of moving north from the second district, at least what we know of the districts now, into the first district, there's been a lot of campaigning already between Republican incumbent Ashley Hinson and Democratic challenger Liz Mathis. For example, the Hinson camp has given Mathis keeps calling her liberal Liz. I wonder what do you expect we're going to see there?
More of that, probably. That seems to me like it'll be a very nationalized race. That they're certainly Hinson has access to plenty of funds, and I imagine that Mathis will as well. And so, I think it's going to be a race where you see the same slogan they're putting in TV commercials and on mailers in every other district are the same ones that I imagine the campaigns will use there.
We'll hear a lot about socialism and extreme right-wing radicalism and liberal Liz, and I'm sure Democrats will come up with a name for Ashley Hinson. It'll be very high-minded, it'll be great for TV stations.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the outcome of that race. I think that Ashley is, relatively still new to that seat, and Liz is very well known. She's done a good job in her time in Iowa politics, connecting with the people who are in her district. I think that she's very good at that, and we'll see where it goes.
So Sophia, you are one of the inaugural class of the Gazette's editorial fellows, and I wondered, if you could tell us a little bit about that and what it's been like for you.
So when you say inaugural, I'm hearing there might be a round 2.
I hope so. I don't know.
Yeah, so I am an editorial fellow. What month did that start? Do you remember, Adam?
I don't. Earlier this year, 3-4 months ago, yeah.
Yeah. So have been writing 2 columns a month since then. It's been a really nice opportunity to be part of something that I hadn't necessarily considered as an option before. I've written a couple of op-eds in the past, but nothing to this volume. So it's been nice to put some thought into what I think would be important to talk to the community about.
Your latest piece was about kind of the imagined danger of Black people. I live in Iowa City, and I never knew there was a police helicopter that flew over the Wellington Heights neighborhood in Cedar Rapids. How has that type of surveillance affected Black people in the community?
Until I moved here, I also had no idea. I didn't know that this helicopter program existed until I moved here and someone said, well, when you're picking your house, just make sure you don't live where that's flying over your head. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Being over policed is something that we know this happens. Statistically, this happens. It's not just Cedar Rapids by any means. It's not just Iowa by any means. But it has been a consistent component of the inequities that exist in the criminal justice system.
It was interesting. I mean, when I moved to Cedar Rapids a long time ago, and I mean, City Hall was very proud of having the helicopter and talked about, it was a great tool for law enforcement, although it seemed it was hard to really prove that it was useful in some cases where they were actually looking for somebody or had a car chase or something like that where they could monitor it from the air more safely than from the ground. But it was costly, and eventually, it's in a way it's similar to the situation in Johnson County where they have the, what is it, Adam, the MRAP, the MV, whatever, the armored car personnel carrier. It was military surplus sort of equipment, and law enforcement jumped on it and said, yeah, we can use that. And then after a while, people were like, do we really need this? Is it a useful tool? Is it worth the cost? So there were a lot of questions, and eventually, yeah, the city decided not to continue the air fleet.
You can you can imagine hypotheticals for any piece of police equipment that they might ask for about why this would be helpful. The question is whether that's how it's used in practice. And so is that what it's used for, or is it used to go into Black neighborhoods and to bust up a guy who's got drugs and maybe he has a gun too? So, and that's where the accountability aspect comes in. So if we're going to keep our military surplus vehicle, or if I don't know if any department still has a helicopter, but if they still have them, that there needs to be accountability and oversight in some specific situations where this stuff can be used, and some reporting out afterwards. Because too frequently the story is, if you ask police, why do you need this? They say, well, every situation is different. But in our system, we need some civilian oversight. And I also put in a quick plug that the Gazette company used to have a helicopter, and I think we should bring it back.
We have drones now.
Oh, that's right. Good point.
I can't even imagine from the law enforcement angle how low you would have to fly in order to see things. I see that as being so invasive. The noise of it, just the menace who are they looking for? I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, I could see helicopters in law enforcement if you're like looking for a missing person out in the middle of a cornfield or something, but I don't know. Just seems like it's quite a reach.
But in some cases, the menacing aspect of it is the point that, they want to have a show of force, and, your surveillance isn't useful if no one knows you're surveilling it, because part of it is a deterrent. So I don't know the specifics in this case, but that is, that's a thing that happens.
And that's exactly what came to mind for me when I was reading about the armored vehicle in Johnson County, is that it really feels like it's more about intimidation than anything. The first thing that came to mind for me was the video in the 90s of in LA when they were driving the military vehicles through the neighborhoods and knocking down people's front walls with them.
I wanted to talk because it's kind of the big issue in Iowa and in other states, is just new COVID numbers today show 7,000 new cases and 500 hospitalizations. I think that's in the last week, because we're only getting data weekly now. So the hospitalization numbers match where we were in January, back before a lot of people were vaccinated, or vaccines were even available to the large share of Iowans. Iowa City Mayor Bruce Teague last week issued an emergency order requiring masks in public buildings, including K through 12 schools and the University of Iowa. The schools quickly said, we don't think this applies to us. I guess wanted to ask you guys, do you think that this was a good idea to send a message? How does this local ordinance match up against the law prohibiting mask mandates?
Well, I'm not a lawyer and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but what I'm reading is that the state law says you can't require property owners to require masks. Basically, it applies to property owners, whereas Mayor Teague's proclamation applies to individuals and puts the burden or the responsibility on them to mask up. I don't know how effective it will be, since already the university has said we're going to follow state law. The schools seem to be taking a similar tack. If it helps, I mean, if more people wear masks, I guess that's a good thing. There's a whole nother argument about home rule and whether the mayor should be able to do this or the state should set policies. It's a bit reminiscent of when Johnson County voted to raise the minimum wage in Johnson County, and the state said, no, you can't do that. This is a statewide rate. I don't know if the state will take Mayor Teague to court or not. They may, his order expires, I think, at the end of September. So they may just let it go. But it's just another piece of this really confusing COVID policy in Iowa.
I'm not surprised by the school's response. Schools aren't funded by cities, and they do have to hear directly from a lot of parents. I do have to say, as I spent the entirety of last school year doing at-home kindergarten with a 5-year-old. Cannot recommend. I was very excited to send her to physical, tangible, real school this year, and at the same time, it's terrifying. So I understand the desire to protect the kids, to protect the populace. I absolutely get it. But the response of the schools and saying we really can't enforce that is not a shocker to me.
Like James mentioned, there is a law they passed this year that says local governments can't impose mask mandates. But even before that law was in place, the Attorney General said that cities didn't have this power to mandate masks. And so I just saw this afternoon, the Iowa Capitol Dispatch reported that the Attorney General office is reviewing it, but they have plenty of time to do so because there's no teeth to the order that they put in place. So there's no way they could enforce it because there's no enforcement mechanism in the text. So I think it's it's legally impotent, but it's still a good idea if it encourages people to wear masks. My observation in Iowa City is that mask use has been increasing for the past couple of weeks. I don't know if it's necessary. I can't pin it to the order that came out late last week, but part of the deal with this COVID stuff is that to some extent, people are going to do what people are going to do, and the orders in government policies might have some effect on it. But people's decisions to stay home and to mask, they don't necessarily ebb and flow directly with the orders.
And I believe there's been now at least one lawsuit over masks in schools. One lawsuit filed. I think I see just anecdotally on Facebook, some people from different school districts saying, less than half of the students are wearing masks, more than, it really seems to vary. How do you guys see this conflict continuing to play out in schools?
I don't have children in school, but I can't imagine that it's going to go smoothly. Especially because some parents are so vocal and so strident about either being pro-mask or anti-mask that it's going to carry over to the students, and I anticipate it will cause problems for students who choose to wear a mask or whose parents order them to wear a mask. like I said, it's part of this confusing, chaotic COVID protocol here in Iowa.
I'm very excited to see that vaccine for those under 12. Can't wait.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I just took the opportunity to try to enroll my 11-year-old in a trial, but the odds are probably not great. But I think, I mean, I wonder if some of it's going to come, you know, if we see outbreaks in schools, you know, where the masking is not widespread, if that's going to kind of change districts or parents' attitudes about it. I mean, I hope we don't, but I wonder, do you think that that's going to be a factor?
You mean locally? Because we've already seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess how big of an outbreak does it take to kind of cause differences, you know, for changes in administration in their policies? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to see the state changing course. Maybe you could see districts doing more, but at the point that you're at an outbreak, you know, you're past the point where a mask policy is going to be helpful. You know, you're already spreading the virus to an extent that masks probably won't prevent. So yeah, it's extremely difficult for me to see the Governor Reynolds going back or empowering states or school districts to enforce masks or to do you know, widespread learn from home or anything like that.
I think she would do learn from home before she would do any sort of a mask mandate.
I would agree with that. And I think that we're more likely to see parents opting to remove their children voluntarily from schools in order to protect them before we're likely to see any kind of a mandate from the state level.
I've seen people say they passed a law this year to make it easier to start charter schools, which are public schools, but they have, you know, alternative coursework. And people have said, I think, you know, mostly joking, but it might not be a bad idea that, you know, you could have a masked charter school and an unmasked charter school. Because at this point, I just don't see a way forward that, you know, parents in those two camps are going to coexist very well. But we'll see.
Well, then the Republicans get what they want. They get charter schools.
Right.
All right. So earlier this summer, and Sofia, you talked about this earlier, when Governor Kim Reynolds announced she was going to send Iowa State Patrol troopers to the U.S. border with Mexico, there were a lot of questions from the public. I remember Gazette articles at that time saying, how much is this going to cost? You know, are we going to be safe here in Iowa? You know, how long is it going to last? And it turns out state troopers had those same questions too, even as Governor Reynolds was telling the public that everything was, that the troopers had told her it was all going to be fine here. We found some emails, an email release that showed that they did have a lot of these same questions. I wanted to, just ask the panelists here, what do you think? Do you think any light's been shed on what the purpose of this deployment was, and did we accomplish it?
It feels political. It feels like we're making a good show.
Yeah, if that was the goal of the mission, then I guess mission accomplished, maybe. But I don't think that any public safety mission was served, even if they were involved with prosecuting some actual bad crimes, or at least investigating some bad crimes. But in the grand scheme of things, it's that doesn't do anything to solve the problems with violence or crime in the border zone. It's not even a band-aid on the problems that exist down there. The reason for those problems is that we so heavily restrict immigration. And so if you, like I said earlier, if you really want to stop illegal immigration, you can make immigration legal. And I think that, give people access to resources and connect them to places where they can come here and work and get educated or whatever they need. Because in the big picture, on average, those people are contributors to our economy and our society. They're not takers. And so the whole thing is unfortunate that's happening at the border, but it's because of our immigration restrictions primarily.
They intercepted some drugs and weapons, but I don't think any Iowa law enforcement officer would tell you that there's been an appreciable decrease in drug flowing into Iowa, or weapons, or probably for that matter, immigrants arriving in Iowa. So yeah, Sofia's right. It does look very political. Last year when Minnesota asked for Iowa's help in the wake of the George Floyd murder, the governor didn't send troopers to Minnesota. That was a much closer public safety situation. And I think what's really concerning too is just her whole, attitude and approach to this, that we're not going to tell the public anything about this, the cost, how many troopers, how long they're going to be gone, what they're doing, all those questions that we had. And thanks to you, Erin, now we have some answers. It's really telling that the governor's public safety leaders had concerns that she apparently ignored for some political purpose.
So to the point about political purpose, what was that purpose? And do you think this show of force impressed who it was intended to impress?
It probably impressed people who are concerned about, brown-skinned people coming across the border. Beyond that, it's something that gets you favorable coverage on Fox News, which is the source of news for a large part of the Republican base. So, it probably was successful in that sense.
I think for historically, we've had a really odd relationship with the reality of the pull factors that are bringing people to the United States from Latinx countries. We have continuously scapegoated Latinx immigrants for a variety of crimes, when truly it's always been economic. There was a time when the flow of people back and forth across the border was uninterrupted, and people didn't stay as long at that point. They would come here, work, go back, because it was about economic need and economic means. And at this point, when we're sitting in a labor shortage and a labor crisis, that means businesses are closing days of the week, or are closing altogether because they don't have the staff to keep operations going. It makes very little sense to continue denying the fact that that's what people are actually coming here for, to the tune of $380,000 worth of trooper time.
There have been stories at both ends of our corridor just about how cities and counties are going to spend the American Rescue Plan Act money. I hope I have that acronym right. And, in Iowa City, there's been a big push to support excluded workers, those that did not qualify for unemployment benefits and many other rounds of aid. I think the Iowa City Council is going to hear this and talk about it September 7th. What do you, the panelists, think is going to happen there? Do you think we're going to see a lot of this money going to some of these workers and folks who have missed out on other aid?
If that does happen, it's a great credit to the activists who've been on the case. I know the Iowa City Human Rights Commission just this week, I don't know what action they specifically took, but they came out in favor of that plan. And I think it's a good idea. I think I'm a big fan of giving people in need money. I don't think poor people are stupid or that they're crooks. I think that they just need more money. And so instead of, making them jump through hoops and go through programs, we can just give them money and they can buy what they need. And it doesn't make any sense that people who are here without legal authorization would be cut out from the aid that the rest of us got. They're members of our communities, even if they don't have legal status. They, in many cases, they did this with no means testing. They just sent everybody a check, or I guess they did fade it out at the very high levels, but they, some of these immigrant workers would have needed it the most, or put it to the best use. And so it's probably too little too late, but it would be a good thing for the city and the county to do. And it seems plausible to me. I think that the activists who have worked on this have done a good job of building up the case and, both making the case well and then making it loud and making it frequently and being active and engaged. So credit to them.
I'm smiling a little bit when you say that poor people aren't dumb and poor people aren't, all of these things. I lived an extended period of time in my life in poverty, and those are absolutely the stigmas that were evident in dealing with just about every facet of life. So I appreciate that vote of confidence.
And it is, that's what you hear is, oh, you can't give people money because they'll buy the wrong things with it. And some people will, but some people who have jobs use their jobs to buy, to feed their destructive habits. And so I think overwhelmingly that, people who need help, if you give them the resources, that they'll make smart decisions.
I wanted to kind of go local here where, we are in Cedar Rapids, and I know we have listeners from outside of the area, but there's a three-way race for Cedar Rapids mayor. And last month, kind of a big story in the Gazette was incumbent Mayor Brad Hart seemed to kind of pressure a nonprofit organization not to host an event with one of his challengers, Amara Andrews, because of the potential, he said because of potential violations for the group's nonprofit status. Does that incident say anything about the race so far? And, what can we expect?
You would not expect a comfortable incumbent to do something like that, I guess that's what it says about the race. I think it says a lot about the candidate himself, but that's what it says about the state of the race.
Well, apparently he didn't have to worry about the CSPS losing its tax nonprofit status since that was already happening, but calling attention to it probably didn't help him at all.
There's just so much opportunity, I think, for candidates to sort of rise above and show the best of themselves. And unfortunately, not everyone takes the opportunity to do so.
That was very diplomatic.
Thanks, kindly.
I don't have to be a diplomat, so I'll say that it was extremely out of line for, whatever you think about the substance of the event or whatever like that, that's not the role for the mayor to play whatsoever to do that. So reflect extremely poorly on Mayor Hart.
I thought it was interesting that he left a message about this. Oftentimes we cover politicians who barely will put things in emails. Of all these thousands of emails I reviewed on the state patrol thing, only maybe 30 had anything of interest in it. So people are aware not to put things in emails sometimes, and yet this is a message, a voicemail message.
I think it just goes to show it's not a fight that he thought carefully about picking. It's something that he got mad about and shot off a voicemail.
It is indeed. And I think you're right. I speaking as someone who has run for public office, I was very careful about the things that I said and very careful about the things that I put in emails. And I probably wouldn't have left a voicemail for the entire time at all.
So aside from this CSPS issue, what are some of the main, what are going to be some of the tension points or things that are going to be important in this election for mayor?
I think it's going to be important the way that conversations are had about disaster recovery. I think it's going to be important that the candidates are able to really connect with the populace, and not just with the populace, but with the very small part of the populace that actually votes in this race. I think it's going to be important to be clear about what you see as the role of the city in certain things, and how that plays out in terms of the relationship with the county as well.
Speaking of derecho recovery or disaster recovery, the Gazette learned in its reporting for the 1-year anniversary of the derecho in 2020 that, a year in, we still didn't have any, after action reports that were done at the state level, the county level, the state level. They all say they're going to have these reports by the end of the month, but, it's August 26th, and I still haven't heard of any news conferences or meetings to announce these reports yet. Do you think that that is acceptable? Would you expect to have this done a little quicker?
I don't know what all goes into that. I think, a year, sometimes those types of things could take a year or longer if they're done well, but I don't have any confidence that they're done well. The reason for that is that when you talk to these people, in interviews or when they publish things with us, they thought it went well. They thought that the story of the derecho was that everyone came together and everything got cleaned up and it's all good now. When you still have people that are in inadequate housing because of what happened in the derecho, you still have people who have serious home repair problems that they can't get taken care of because they don't have the resources and there's just not the workers to get it done. And so that was always going to be a chaotic situation, what happened in the derecho. And it's not necessarily their fault, they weren't prepared for it, but when you're talking about days later that people weren't connected to the resources they need, I think that's a big failure. But again, the story you usually hear from the people who are in positions of power is that it went really good and it's CR strong and we can all be proud of our community. So when that's the take you have on it, I don't have any hope that that anyone in the community can take a serious look at what went wrong with the response.
If only we had some roofers from Mexico or some carpenters from Guatemala to help with those home repairs.
We do.
I still am getting emails from folks who are connected with that condo association in Cedar Rapids, Lexington Green and Lexington East, about that. I think that really opened a can of worms with regard to repairs still not done and HOA issues and things like that. So still a lot of unresolved things, as you point out, Adam.
Yeah, it's not good. And, I know that the derecho isn't necessarily associated with climate change, but these disasters are going to happen more often. And I don't have any confidence that certainly we learned a lot from the floods, but I don't think that we're getting better at, disaster response in general as a state or as a country.
So regarding climate change, just last week, there was a major report that came out, again, reminding us how dire it is, in terms of reducing greenhouse gases in order to head off the worst effects of climate change. I feel like I heard a lot of alarm about this out on social media. And I've kind of talked with an expert who said it's public policy that needs to change. And I just wonder, what the panel thinks about what it's going to take in order to reduce, to cause the public policy changes that we need.
So I know that there is some work being done at the city level in terms of, I'm not going to remember the name of the committee, but I know that there's a city committee related to environmental sustainability. I know that Sunrise Movement has been working on this for a while. I know that there is also effort at the county level to deal with it. But, one of the articles that I wrote was related to environmental injustice and related to environmental equity. And in that article, one of the questions that I posed was, if we are putting this work into these committees and putting it into task forces, is it going to suffer from some of the same challenges that exist in almost any task force or almost any committee, where it becomes, okay, we're having meetings and meetings and meetings, and there's so much planning and so much conversation that the work can't get done in time. And when we're dealing with something as immediate as climate change, we really don't have time to waste.
I think clearly this is an issue that will take action from multiple levels of government, that cities can't do this by themselves. And I'm not super hopeful that Congress is going to come around some big plan in the next few years, but there are a few promising signs that climate change denial in the Republican Party is still strong, but not as strong as it was even 10 years ago. You have a lot more people that are willing to say climate change is happening, and even that it is caused by humans. And so obviously that is a necessary burden to get over if we're going to take serious action on it. But I'm not super hopeful that that there will be significant action at the federal level anytime soon.
That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate to hear. Having had some of these conversations, one of the things that I learned is that 70% of our greenhouse gases within Cedar Rapids, and I think maybe even within Lynn County, were due to industry. So it's not even something that we as individuals can have enough of an impact on to make a significant change. We have to do this work with the businesses, with the business community that exists, and we have to figure out how to compel that work, or we have to figure out how to incentivize it, or both.
In Iowa right now, they can't even figure out how to get farmers to stop putting pig poop in the river. And so, the idea that we're going to take this huge action, and again, that all the work we've done on that is voluntary. It's about incentives. And at some point you have to say that people can't just spew whatever they want into the air, into the water, and that it's, to mandate that.
It was really interesting to me to learn that what we are doing here in Iowa is having such a huge impact on the ability of people to go out and shrimp in the Gulf.
Yeah, I think it's just amazing that we would, if we're still waiting for people to acknowledge that climate change is real, I don't see how we're going to make change fast enough. It's just an overwhelming question. I wonder, are there, from what you guys know, are there measures in the infrastructure bill at the federal level that could spur faster development of renewable energy?
There definitely is money for renewable energy. I don't know the specifics. And then another thing that's been talked about a lot is the supports for electric vehicle charging stations, which is a big barrier to acquisition of those, is that you can't necessarily make a cross-country trip in all situations, depending on the route and the kind of car you have. So to bolster that, and there's a lot of technology. The technologies that are going to solve this are really get us to the end of the line might not exist yet, and so it's everything we're doing is still kind of like these bridge solutions.
Yeah,
Iowa Environmental Council just announced that it's proposing that Iowa reach 100% clean power generation by 2035. That's a proposal. So it'll get talked about for a few minutes.
it's a proposal by the Iowa Environmental Council, right?
Right.
So a group that doesn't really have the power to make the changes, that's kind of what I thought when I saw it. But it'd be a great goal.
Yeah. If you think about it, whether we're talking about clean water or vaccinations or wearing masks or so many of these things, we all know what the right thing is, what the right solution is. But as long as it's voluntary, and I don't think that it's in my economic interest, perhaps, or these things aren't going to get done. How many years have we been waiting for water quality improvements based on voluntary actions? It would take forever, according to the scientists. So unless government is willing to actually step up and sort of govern, we're probably not going to make progress on these things, including climate change.
And something that I think that we need to come to terms with is that, that 2035 sounds like a reasonable deadline to me. 14 years, that seems like a reasonable amount of time, but reasonable deadlines aren't going to cut it when we're dealing with climate change, because the impact of that is happening so quickly and escalating so rapidly that we're not going to be able to make good on what we need to make good on to save the world.
Well, lest we end on a negative note, I will just issue this as a call to action for any lawmakers who are listening here to do something already. We don't have a lot of time, so that's where I'll end that. But Our next Pints in Politics is Thursday, September 23rd, and we'll be live or virtual. I don't know, but we will be looking at the COVID rates and monitoring that in the communities, and we should have more details after Labor Day. I want to thank our panel so much tonight for flexibility about with kind of the changing event status. Just as a reminder, our panel is Adam Sullivan, Gazette columnist, James Lynch, Gazette political reporter, and Sofia DeMartino, Gazette editorial fellow. So from all of us here